Germany, Europe's economic engine, the country that makes the machines that make the world run. But this engine has a secret, one it's been hiding for over half a century. To fill the gap, Germany imported workers, millions of them, and by some measures it worked. Today, foreign workers generate over 700 billion euros for the German economy, 1 in every 6 euros. Politicians call this a success story, but here's what they don't tell you. The same research that produced that 700 billion figure? Using a different, equally valid methodology, it found that each migrant costs the German state 79,000 euros over their lifetime. Same data, same researchers. Two opposite stories if you only hear one. This isn't about whether migration is good or bad. This is about math. And math has no politics, and this is the story they're not telling you. How a temporary labor fix became a permanent dependency. How a nation that called for workers but got people built a trap it cannot escape. Economically, demographically, politically, and why, after 70 years, there is no way out. To understand how Germany walked into this trap, we need to go back to 1955, to a decision made in the chaos of the Cold War, and a promise that was never meant to be kept. West Germany is experiencing the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. Factories can't hire fast enough, construction is booming, the country is rebuilding from rubble into an industrial powerhouse. There's just one problem, not enough Germans. The solution? Import workers, but call them guests. Gastarbeiter. The name itself was a promise. You're just visiting. The plan was elegant in its cynicism. Workers would come for 1, maybe 2 years, fill the gap, then go home and be replaced by fresh labor. No integration needed, no social costs, no citizenship questions, a disposable workforce. Recruitment agreements were signed with Italy in 1955, Spain and Greece in 1960, but the pivotal agreement, the one that would define Germany's future, came in October 1961. With Turkey, here's what most histories leave out. Germany didn't want Turkish workers. Internal government memos show officials actively resisted. They argued that Turkey, quote, was not a European country. The cultural distance was too great, the integration challenges too severe. So why did they sign? The Cold War. Turkey sat on the Soviet border, a critical NATO ally, and the United States pushed West Germany to accept the agreement, to strengthen ties with Ankara, to keep Turkey firmly in the Western orbit, a geopolitical calculation, with demographic consequences that would echo for generations. And here's the connection nobody makes. Just 2 months before the Turkish agreement was signed, the Berlin Wall went up. Overnight, the flow of East German workers, 3.5 million, had already fled west since 1949, stopped completely. The labor shortage became a crisis. Germany was no longer choosing guest workers, it was dependent on them. A Swiss playwright named Max Frisch saw what was coming. In 1965, he wrote 9 words that would become the epitaph of the entire program. We called for workers, but people came. By 1973, 2.5 million guests were working in Germany. 12% of the entire workforce, 605,000 from Turkey, 535,000 from Yugoslavia, 450,000 from Italy. The rotation principle, exposed as fiction. Employers didn't want to constantly retrain new workers, and the workers themselves, they had built lives, made friends, started families. Then came the 1973 oil crisis. The economy contracted, unemployment spiked. And on November 23rd, the government announced the Anwerbestop, a complete halt to foreign worker recruitment. The message was clear. The party's over. Time for the guests to go home. They were about to discover you can't deport a population. The 1973 recruitment stop is one of the great policy backfires in modern history. Look at this graph. The foreign population didn't shrink after the stop. It grew by over 1 million people in the first decade alone. The psychology was simple, and the government completely missed it. Before 1973, workers could leave Germany, earn money at home, return when they wanted. The door was open both ways. After the stop? If you left Germany, you could never come back. Faced with that choice, millions of temporary workers made a permanent decision. They stayed, and they sent for their families. In the 1960s, 80% of guest workers lived in Germany without their families. By the 1980s, that number was below 20%. The rotation principle wasn't just dead, it had reversed. Now, publicly, German politicians spoke of integration, of welcoming their long-term guests. Privately, a very different story. Chancellor Helmut Kohl's private goal, documented in leaked cabinet notes, was to reduce the Turkish population by half. His government tried to pay people to leave. The 1983 Return Assistance Act offered unemployed foreign workers 10,500 Deutschmarks plus 1,500 per child to go home permanently. The result? About 300,000 people took the money, mostly those who were already planning to leave anyway. The policy was quietly abandoned. The 50% reduction Kohl wanted never came close. Here's the cruel irony of the guest worker fiction. Because they were never supposed to stay, no one planned for them to stay. Schools weren't prepared for non-German speaking children. Housing was segregated, by design, not accident. Language programs were minimal. Job training was absent. Germany didn't have an immigration policy, it had a policy of denial. The result was predictable: parallel societies, communities that existed alongside German society but never fully within it. By 1994, half of all foreigners in Germany had lived there for over a decade. 1 in 4 had been there for 20 years or more. And here's the number that should shock you. 1.2 million of the 7 million foreign nationals were born in Germany. They had never lived anywhere else. And legally, they were still foreigners. And still officially, Germany insisted, "We are not a country of immigration." For 40 years, Germany refused to name what it had become. And while politicians debated semantics, a demographic time bomb was ticking. Let's talk about the math that German politicians spent decades avoiding. To maintain a stable population, no growth, no decline, a country needs a fertility rate of 2.1 children per woman. Germany dropped below that line in 1970. It has never recovered, 55 years, below replacement every single year. The current rate, 1.35, among the lowest on the planet. And if you want to see what demographic collapse really looks like, after reunification, East Germany experienced something demographers had never seen before: a fertility rate of 0.77, and the lowest ever recorded for a large population in human history. Women essentially stopped having children. An entire generation, traumatized by economic collapse, chose not to reproduce. Now, since 1972, Germany has recorded more deaths than births every year. The population only grows because of immigration. Without it, Germany would already be shrinking. But here's the number that keeps German finance ministers awake at night. Germany's working-age population, ages 20 to 66, peaked in 2024 at 51.2 million. By 2035, it will shrink by up to 3.8 million people. By 2050, potentially 9 million fewer workers. At the same time, the population over 67 will explode. By 2035, 1 in 4 Germans will be retirement age. The number of people over 80 will grow from 6 million to nearly 10 million. Think about what this means in practice. In 1992, there were 2.7 workers paying into the pension system for every retiree collecting from it. By 2022, that number was 2.0, up by 2030, projected to be 1.5. We're heading toward a society where every 3 workers support 2 retirees. The pension system, the oldest in the world, by the way, created by Bismarck in 1889, was never designed for this. Now, you might think just bring in more migrants. That's the solution, right? In the year 2000, the United Nations published a study on exactly this question. They called it replacement migration: how much immigration would be needed to offset population decline. For Germany, they calculated several scenarios. To maintain total population 344,000 per year. Achievable. Germany has hit that number. To maintain working-age population 487,000 per year. More difficult, but possible. To maintain the current worker-to-retiree ratio 3.63 million migrants per year. That last number would mean 181 million immigrants by 2050. More than double Germany's current population. The UN's own conclusion? Quote, out of reach. Impossible. Immigration cannot solve population aging. It can only delay the reckoning, while the immigrants themselves grow old and require the same support. This is the mathematical trap Germany walked into. It needs hundreds of thousands of migrants every year just to stay afloat, but each wave of migrants eventually ages, retires, and requires their own replacement. It's not a solution. It's a treadmill, and there's no getting off. If you're enjoying this cheerful breakdown of demographic collapse, do me a favor and destroy that like button. And drop a comment. If you were running Germany, would you take the Japan path, the Denmark path, or try something else? I'm genuinely curious. The math is clear. Migration cannot solve this. It can only buy time. But understanding the math doesn't explain why Germany hid the reality from its own people. That story starts in Cologne. New Year's Eve, 2015, August 2015. Hundreds of thousands of refugees, mostly from Syria, fleeing a brutal civil war, are stranded at Hungary's border. Europe's asylum system, designed for thousands, is collapsing under hundreds of thousands. On September 4th, Angela Merkel made the most consequential decision of her 16-year chancellorship. She suspended the Dublin Protocol, the rule that asylum seekers must register in the first EU country they enter, and allowed the refugees stranded in Budapest to enter Germany. Wir schaffen das. We can manage this. In 2015 and 2016 combined, 1.2 million people applied for asylum in Germany. The largest peacetime migration in German history. The economic argument was clear. Germany desperately needed workers. The refugees were young, 75% under 40. They could fill the demographic gap. This was the narrative pushed by government and media alike, a win-win, humanitarian duty and economic necessity perfectly aligned. The reality proved more complicated, and the parts that didn't fit the narrative, they were slow to be reported. On New Year's Eve 2015 in Cologne, over 1,200 women were sexually assaulted or robbed. The perpetrators were predominantly recent arrivals from North Africa and the Middle East. The initial police report described a peaceful night, a relaxed atmosphere. Most major media outlets didn't report the attacks for 5 days. 5 days to report over 1,000 assaults. When they finally did, the backlash was immediate, not just against the attackers, but against the institutions that seemed to have covered it up. A later study by the Hamburg Media School analyzed newspaper coverage throughout the entire refugee crisis. The finding, 82% of news items framed refugees positively. Only 6% examined problems with refugee policy. The researchers' conclusion? Quote, the majority of German journalists failed to report the facts. The gap between official narrative and lived experience created a crisis of trust that Germany still hasn't recovered from. The term Lügenpresse, lying press, a word with dark historical echoes, entered mainstream discourse. By 2024, 1 in 5 Germans believed the media systematically lies to them. Now, this climate of suppressed debate didn't start in 2015. Consider the case of Sarrazin. In 2010, Sarrazin, a former Berlin finance minister and Bundesbank board member, published a book called Deutschland schafft sich ab. Germany abolishes itself. It criticized integration failures and made controversial claims about immigrant communities. The book sold 1.5 million copies. Polls showed between 50 and 90% of Germans agreed with at least some of his views. the response from the political establishment. Chancellor Merkel denounced him before the book was even published. The Bundesbank forced his resignation. His own party, the SPD, attempted to expel him for a decade, finally succeeding in 2020. An overwhelming majority of Germans agreed with a position that was treated as beyond the pale by their political and media establishment. This disconnect would have consequences. In 2017, the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, entered the Bundestag with 12.6% of the vote. It was the first far-right party in the German parliament since World War II. Research found that AfD voters weren't primarily driven by personal economic anxiety. They weren't losers of globalization. They were driven by one thing: anti-immigration attitudes and a belief that the establishment refused to hear them. By 2024, in Eastern German state elections, the AfD won approximately 30%, the first far-right electoral victories in Germany since 1945. The suppressed debate had found another outlet. The gap between official narrative and lived experience didn't just create a political crisis. It obscured a question nobody was asking. Who actually pays the hidden cost? Because it's not the people making the policy. Let's return to those competing numbers from the hook, because this is where the hidden cost gets buried. The Bertelsmann Foundation study from 2014 is constantly cited. It found that foreign residents generated a net fiscal surplus of 22 billion euros in 2012. That's 3,300 euros per person per year. Positive. This is the number you hear. Here's the number you don't hear. The same study, same researchers, same data, using an equally valid methodology that allocates general state expenditures proportionally, found something very different. Negative 79,000 euros per person over a lifetime. Same data, same researchers. Different assumptions about how to count. Neither number is a lie, both are defensible, but you only hear the positive one, and there's a crucial distinction that often gets blurred. Migrants are not a monolith. Intra-EU migrants from Poland, Romania, Italy consistently show positive fiscal contributions. They come to work, they pay taxes, they're often skilled. Extra-EU migrants, particularly from the 2015 refugee wave, show different patterns. It took the 2015 cohort 9 years to reach 64% employment. And look at this, men from that cohort reached 77% employment. Women, 31%, a 46-point gender gap, almost never discussed. It means a large population permanently outside the workforce, permanently dependent on benefits. But the fiscal debate misses something. Government budgets are abstract. The real hidden cost shows up where people actually live. Research across 382 German districts found that each 1% increase in migration pushes housing prices up by up to 3%. Rents rise about 1%. But here's the critical finding. At the bottom of the housing market, the affordable segment, the effects are more than double. The people competing with new arrivals for apartments aren't wealthy Germans in Munich penthouses. They're working-class Germans, young couples, low-income families, previous immigrants, the people least able to absorb the cost. What about wages? The research is actually favorable for most Germans. Studies show minimal impact on native German wages overall, but the effects aren't distributed equally. They concentrate on two groups, less qualified workers and older workers. And one group bears the biggest cost, previous immigrants. Each new wave competes directly with the last one. The German professional class experiences migration through cheaper restaurants and more available caregivers. The German working class experiences it through competition for housing, jobs and school places. Two Germanys, experiencing the same policy completely differently. Meanwhile, entire industries have restructured around migrant labor. Construction and drywall, 67% migrant workforce. Catering, 54%. Food production, 51%. Meat processing, 42%. Elderly care, 33%. These sectors don't just employ migrants, they depend on them. German business associations openly lobby for more immigration. The Federation of German Industries represents 100,000 companies. They've stated Germany has an immense need for workers. Their position on migration is diametrically opposed to a growing share of the population. This is the political trap layered on top of the demographic trap. Germany's economy needs more migration. Its business class demands it. But a growing plurality of voters, now over 20% voting AfD, plus the new left-wing anti-immigration BSW party, reject it. Germany passed a liberalized Skilled Immigration Act in 2023, easier visas, faster processing. But the same year, xenophobic incidents spiked. Skilled workers from India, the Philippines, and elsewhere increasingly report hostility, and many are leaving, and Germany needs them. Germany recruited them, and Germany is driving them away. Germany's working class competes for housing and jobs. Germany's professional class benefits from cheaper services. Two countries inside one, but here's the thing, Germany wasn't forced into this trap. Other countries facing the same demographic crisis made different choices, and those choices prove something important. Germany isn't alone in its demographic crisis. Every wealthy nation is aging. Everyone faces the same fundamental equation: fewer workers, more retirees, unsustainable pension systems. But they've made different choices. Japan's fertility rate hit 1.15 in 2024, even lower than Germany's. Its population has been actively shrinking since 2008. But Japan made a different choice. Instead of mass immigration, it invested in automation. Japan accounts for 47% of global robot production. Its foreign workforce, just 2% of the total compared to 10% across wealthy nations. The economic cost is real. Japan's GDP growth from 2000 to 2019 averaged less than 0.25% annually. The United States grew nearly 10 times faster. If Japan's working-age population had stayed at its 1997 peak, its economy would be 20% larger today. Japan chose economic stagnation to preserve social cohesion. Germany rejected that trade-off. Denmark took a third path, mass immigration, followed by radical restriction. In 2019, Denmark's Social Democrats, the left-wing party, adopted the right's anti-immigration platform and won. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen implemented what critics call Europe's harshest policies: mandatory daycare from age 1 for children in designated parallel society areas, double criminal penalties in certain neighborhoods, forced dispersal of non-Western residents. In 2024, Denmark granted only 860 asylum applications. Their stated goal? 0 asylum seekers. It's a gamble. Can you have a generous welfare state without the immigration that other countries say the welfare state requires? And then there's Sweden, the country that took more refugees per capita than any other European nation in 2015, the humanitarian superpower. The integration results were poor. Only 39% of refugee men and 26% of women were in work or study 1 year after completing integration programs. But it's not the economic statistics that change Sweden. It's this. Sweden is the only country in Europe where gun deaths have been continuously rising for 2 decades. Gang violence, concentrated in immigrant communities, has transformed one of Europe's safest countries. The Sweden Democrats, once a pariah party with neo-Nazi roots, won 20.6% of the vote in 2022. The new government slashed the refugee quota from 5,000 to 900. Sweden didn't choose restriction. Restriction was forced upon it. Japan proves a country can survive demographic decline at economic cost. Denmark proves restriction is politically viable if you're willing to be called harsh. Sweden proves the costs of failed integration are not just economic, they're social and they're violent. Germany looked at these options and chose none of them. It combined the worst elements: the dependency of accepting millions without Japan's homogeneity, the scale of Sweden without the time to learn from Sweden's mistakes, none of Denmark's control. Germany has neither Japan's social cohesion, nor Denmark's political will, nor Sweden's excuse of ignorance. It built a trap with its eyes open. And now, the trap is closing. Every trap has a moment when it snaps shut. For Germany, that moment is visible in the pension mathematics. The ratio of workers to retirees is collapsing. The contribution rate, currently 18.6% of wages, must rise to somewhere between 24 and 29% by 2070 just to maintain current benefit levels. The Bundesbank has suggested linking retirement age to life expectancy. Under that formula, Germans would retire at 69 by 2070. None of this is politically acceptable. All of it is mathematically inevitable. Think about the political trap. The government that tells voters their pensions are secure while raising retirement ages loses elections. The government that tells business their labor supply is secured while restricting immigration loses donors. The government that tells citizens their neighborhoods are safe while integration fails loses trust. There is no coalition in Germany that can satisfy all three. Migration was supposed to be the solution, but it's a leaky bucket. Hole 1, the migrants Germany needs most, the skilled, the educated, the ones who contribute the most, have the most options, and they're most likely to leave when they encounter hostility. Surveys show skilled immigrants have the highest emigration intentions of any group. Hole 2, migrant fertility converges to German rates by the second generation. The demographic boost is temporary. Hole 3, every immigrant ages. Today's worker is tomorrow's pensioner, requiring their own replacement. Germany isn't filling a bucket, it's running on a treadmill. And the treadmill is speeding up. The Federal Statistical Office's own assessment is unambiguous. Quote, the resulting gap cannot be closed by the assumed migration gains. Even under optimistic immigration scenarios, Germany's working-age population will shrink by millions. The only scenario that prevents collapse combines high migration with increased fertility, and there is no evidence German fertility will increase. 70 years ago, Germany called for workers and got people. It promised those people were temporary, then made them permanent. It denied it was a country of immigration. While depending on immigrants, it welcomed millions without planning for integration. It now needs millions more, while a growing share of its population rejects them. The trap is complete. Germany cannot survive economically without migration. It is struggling to survive socially and politically with it. As fertility collapses across the developed world, Germany is not an exception. It's a preview. And it leaves us with the question that will define the coming century. What is the cost of a nation? And who will be asked to pay it? That's the question I'll leave you with. I don't have the answer. Honestly, I don't think anyone does. The math doesn't allow for clean solutions, and politics doesn't allow for honest conversations about the trade-offs. But I'd love to hear what you think. Drop your take in the comments, especially if you disagree with something in this video. The best conversations happen when people push back. And if this is your first time on Economy Unpacked, we do deep dives like this every week. The hidden mechanics behind the headlines, the numbers they don't want you to see, the uncomfortable questions no one else is asking. Subscribe if you want to see what's really happening. I'll see you there.